the commutation cases. First on today's roster is Felix Rosado. Speaking on Mr. Rosado's behalf is Jennifer Storm. Ms. Storm, the floor is yours. I see she's away. Okay. In the meantime, we'll go to the DOC staff. Central Office, DOC staff. Is it fair to say that we spent a lot of time together yesterday, and that Mr. Rosado is, in your estimation, a blue chip kind of inmate, just somebody that you would have no reservations about having a commutation, correct?
That is correct. Mr. Rosado
unqualified. Yeah, sorry. Please go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that Mr. Rosado is one of the most outstanding cases, despite the amount of time he's served compared to a lot of them that I've had the opportunity to represent.
I concur. I was very impressed by Mr. Rosado and his willingness to accept his responsibility and talk about the kind of changes he's undergone. So just one last point, unqualified, unanimous support from Department of Corrections for Mr. Rosado's commutation.
That's correct.
Correct,
okay.
Sir.
Yes, Ms. Clark, so you concur with that 100%?
Yes, I do. And just a real quick story about Mr. Rosado. You know, when I was a corrections unit manager on B unit, I was in charge of a reentry program. And normally inmates would come and they ask about their account balance and names on their visiting list. Mr. Rosado tracked me down because he wanted my group room to start the restorative justice project. So that's the type of individual that he's turned into, where, you know, it's not about him anymore, it's about giving back. So, full support.
Okay. Thank you for that input, Ms. Clark. So I'm turning the floor over to any board members that have questions of correction staff. Just jump in if there is.
Yes, I have some questions. So I'd like to ask corrections staff, are you aware of the personality assessment inventory that was done on May 23rd, 2019?
I've seen it, yes.
Are you concerned about the elevated T-scores with regard to paranoia, affective instability, antisocial behaviors, and drug usage?
No, I'm not, because I believe that's a lot of that would be based on his history and being honest on responding to the questions on the test.
I agree.
So what you're saying is even though the test is designed to assess current attitudes, you're saying that you believe it to reflect past behaviors as opposed to current personality traits and beliefs?
I believe that as inmates or anybody answers that a test like that, they just add historical information in responding to the questions, even though it should be current. I think that just happens. One of my concerns with testing is that it also has to include, to be meaningful, the clinical assessment of the person as well. So the score itself and the elevated things are, for Mr. Rosado, are not of concern to me.
Do you disagree with the test's assessment found on page 7 of the test that his interest and motivation in seeking treatment is somewhat below average in comparison to adults who are not being seen in a therapeutic setting? Do you disagree with that?
I would only disagree with it because he's actually done the opposite. He's taken every possible self-improvement opportunity that he has, as well as trying to create those types of opportunities for the other inmates and people that he works with.
Do you disagree from the results of the test that he reports a personality style that involves a degree of adventurousness adventurousness, risk-taking, and a tendency to be rather impulsive. Do you disagree with that?
I would.
How so?
You can look at a test, but, you know, what our job is to observe. And by observing Mr. Rosado throughout the years, I met him in 2004 as an officer in the restrictive housing unit when he talked about yesterday about getting that misconduct and where he was self-centered and self-reflected, and he took an account of his life. I met him then. And then from there, I became a counselor, a unit manager, and I saw his actions. And you kind of get a sense with people where they want to manipulate the system and where they're actually trying to make a change themselves, and reach out to the community. So I understand what the test results say, but from views and from actions, I think Mr. Rosado was 100% genuine. 100%.
I agree with that assessment.
My final question is, do you disagree with the test's conclusion that he may, at present, have an antisocial personality disorder?
I would disagree that he has that.
It does not display that type of behavior. He doesn't. He simply does not. I see him just about every day prior to COVID, and he has not changed. He's constantly working, not just his job, but working to further the programs and so on that he has. He works with staff, inmates, particularly with the chaplains, which is where he's been working, and he's a very, very positive force. It's not really an antisocial trait.
Thank you.
Ms. Storm, please unmute yourself, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman, and I apologize for my delay. I was on the phone with some of your staff working out some logistics.
We understand why. We're the ones that initiated that call, so thank you for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for hearing from me today. I appreciate that this may seem a little unorthodox, and it's certainly not something that our office does periodically. However, I had the opportunity to meet with Mr. Rosado back in 2013 when I was appointed victim advocate. He had invited myself and my staff to Greaterford to help with the restorative justice program that he was putting in place at the institution. My staff and I were incredibly impressed. We met with a group of lifers who were doing this work, but Mr. Rosado really stuck out, mainly because of his engagement, his curiosity about ensuring that the curriculum they were using was victim-centered and victim-empowered. And truly, this was in 2013, so this was not at a time when pardons, quite frankly, looked like this. So I don't believe his motivation or intention was that he was anticipating one day he would be in this position. Quite honestly, it was the opposite. Most of them did not ever think that they would have an opportunity for a pardon. We engaged with him and the rest of that group for years. I sent many of my staff down to Greaterford over the years to work on the curriculum, to help them implement the curriculum. I myself went to that institution multiple times for not just the restorative group programming, but also for our day of responsibility. And Mr. Rosado was always there and always engaging and always wanting to do the right thing. And his motivation for me was really about acknowledging that it wasn't for necessarily him or even his peers, but it was more about helping prevent violence in the institution. And it was about those violent offenders who were coming in and out of the institution constantly. And he felt that it was his duty as a lifer to ensure that they understood the impact that their crime had. And in conversations with him, it became abundantly clear to me that he truly understood the impact that his crime had. And he had incredible empathy. He had incredible remorse. And I saw that again last night. I had the opportunity to attend his interview. I believe that he is a mentor. He has been a mentor in that institution. I do think that he has rehabilitated his life. I know he committed a horrific offense at a very young age, and there was intoxicants involved. And certainly I appreciate rehabilitation and the ability for individuals to seek rehab and to actually obtain long-term recovery. And I do think that Mr. Rosado has been able to do that. I am not here on behalf of any of the victims in this case. My office, the Office of the Victim Advocate, represents all crime victims, whether they oppose and or support an application. You know that, you see the documentation. I am here in my role as being engaged with him in the institutions. That is also a part of our mission. I'm also not just here on behalf of myself, but several of my staff who definitely believe that Mr. Rosado is deserving of this opportunity. As I said, I appreciate this may be unorthodox. I obviously have been a very outspoken proponent of the Board of Pardons. I've also been an outspoken opposition to just general giving life without parole opportunities for parole. And so I believe that the Board of Pardons is the access to grant relief. I think it's the appropriate and well-vetted entity to give a second look to cases that are deserving. And it doesn't put every lifer in one category. It allows you to evaluate on case-by-case basis. And so I encouraged Mr. Rosado to apply for a pardon when I saw that the Board of Pardons was starting to look at cases a little bit differently and consider cases on their individual merit. And I told him that if he did get a merit review, that I would come and I would testify on his behalf. And so I am doing so today. And I do believe that he is going to go out into the world, and I think he's going to be a leader. And I think he's going to hopefully impact other individuals and use the story that he has, the unfortunate story that he has, to hopefully prevent other crime. He's got a good job lined up. He's got a degree. He's got a strong support system. These are the things that we know make re-entrants successful in the community. And so I believe that he is worthy of your consideration today.
Thank you, Ms. Storm, for your testimony. One final question from me before the board. You have unqualified support for Mr. Rosado's commutation, to be clear.
Yes.
Thank you. The board, if anyone has questions of Ms. Storm, please just jump in. Otherwise, that would conclude Mr. Rosado.
I have some questions for Ms. Storm. Ms. Storm, could you discuss the efforts that were made by your office to reach out to the family of the victim of Mr. Rosado's crime?
Absolutely. So the Office of the Victim Advocate is charged with finding family members, having them registered with our office, and keeping them notified and up to date on any and all occurrences within their court process. I can assure you that all of those measures have been taken. Our office does an extensive, exhaustive job at locating crime victims and family members. And then we provide outreach. At the end of the day, it is the victims and the family members' right to either engage or to not engage. They have several opportunities to engage. They can engage confidentially, they can engage publicly. And so while I can't go into, due to confidentiality, I can't go into too much, but I can assure you that all of our processes and procedures were properly done in this case. We also always make sure we reach out to the district attorney's office in these cases, and we actually work really well with staff from the Attorney General's office. When he came on to the Board of Pardons, he had some staff that are assigned to help with us in terms of investigating and finding family members, and it's been a huge asset to us because the Office of Victim Advocate doesn't necessarily always have access to certain sensitive criminal justice documents. And what I mean by that is if we really need to dig deep into a case to find a family member, we might not necessarily have those documents that they would have as a law enforcement entity. So we also utilize his staff. And so I can assure you that every measure was taken in this case, as is with all the cases that we do and that we provide to you.
Can you tell me how many actual efforts were made with the identified family members, 1, 2, 3, and over how long a period they were attempted to be contacted?
So I can get you all of that documentation. I don't know that it's appropriate to do so publicly. You get a spreadsheet from my office that shows the investigative measures and the outreach that we have made and attempt to make. So I can certainly provide that for you. But there were multiple attempts over the course of decades, obviously, because this is a case that's been obviously active and involved in the justice system for a very long time.
Do you think that in some cases victims' families may be afraid to express opposition because of fear of retribution from an offender should he or she be released, or from the offender's family?
Absolutely, and that's why we have the confidential provisions that we do. It's why we try to hold the board to such high standards of honoring that confidentiality and not talking about victim input. That's not supposed to be discussed at these hearings, because we give victims options, and the law gives them options for that reason. So when we have individuals registered with us, we make sure they know these are all your options. You may provide input under seal, and we will get that to the board for you. You may do so because of the fear of retaliation. That's the whole reason that that statute is in place, to protect victims. You have it for the Board of Pardons. We have it for the Board of Probation and Parole as well. They have the other option of obviously coming here, speaking, and then they also have the option of submitting input that can be publicly known and publicly cited. And you know by seeing it, if it has that blazing word confidential on it and it comes to you as a board member, you know that that's input that a victim is giving to you because they may have concerns. And often that can be they're supporting parole or they're objecting to parole, but they have that right to submit that confidentially so that they know that they are they can sleep at night knowing that their information is protected.
Given everything that you have just said about the potential fear of family members in expressing opposition, are you concerned that your appearance in an advocacy position for an offender could have a chilling effect on the victim's family in this case or other cases from coming forward to express their feelings, given that the leader of the organization that is supposed to address those concerns is in fact speaking on behalf of an offender?
No, I don't, because I know that the outreach efforts were done by my office properly. And again, due to confidentiality, that's all I can say about that. I'm not here on their behalf. I'm here to talk about what I know of this applicant and his institutional adjustment and the impact that he's had on our office and our programming. And so I realize it's unorthodox, but I also think it's appropriate that my office reflects all opinions. Period. We you know, if a surviving family member comes forward and they have a stance, then that's the stance that we're going to put forth. And like I said, in this instance, we support the Board of Pardons. We want to see the Board of Pardons used judiciously and appropriately. And this was a case that rose high enough to myself and my staff that we felt it was appropriate for us to lend our experience. And certainly we vetted that with OGC counsel, with the governor's office, to make sure that I wasn't doing anything outside of the appropriate confines of my position and my role.
Thank you.
I'd like to follow up on that. I have one question. You're correct. The Office of Victim Advocate reflects all opinions. I think you just said that, Ms. Storm. And sometimes the Office of Victim Advocate comes before us and says that the family members of the victims support commutation. Mm-hmm. And other times, like we saw just yesterday, they come forward and say they don't support the commutation. So as you sit here today supporting this defendant, the actual victims may be strongly against his commutation. And my question to you is, did you consider that as the chief victim advocate for the Commonwealth when you decided to put yourself in this position, put your office in this position, and appear here today?
Yes, I did.
And notwithstanding your responsibility to the Commonwealth, you determined that it was best to move forward on behalf of Mr. Rosado and not on behalf of the victims.
So you're mincing words here. I'm not here on behalf of the victims.
I'm not mincing words.
I stated that initially. I'm here on behalf of the Office of the Victim Advocate to express experience that we've had with this applicant. Our role with the surviving family members in this case has been fulfilled to the letter of the law. What I'm doing here today is not on their behalf. I am here today representing our agency's interaction with this applicant. Period.
I want to redirect, Ms. Storm.
Mm-hmm.
You represent the entire spectrum of victims and their views, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you have made it abundantly clear you are in no way representing your official capacity.
Yes.
And you jump through every legal clearance hoop, general counsel, to make sure there is no actual or even perceived conflict of interest. And your testimony, in my opinion, is incredibly valuable. And I'm going to ask one more question. When have you ever done this before on behalf of an inmate?
This would be the first time.
So this is the first time. And
Yes.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I suspect is it because that you believe Mr. Rosado is so deserving that you took the singularly unique step to say, as a private citizen, I, Jennifer Storm, am saying that you know who I am, what I've been through, and what I do for a living. I am here to stand in support of Mr. Rosado. Is that a fair statement?
Yes. I'm a person of my word, and I have to, unfortunately, sometimes in a realm of policy, take really strong stances on behalf of a large majority of victims. And so in this criminal justice reform place, our office officially has taken a lot of stances. In that, we also do a lot of restorative justice work with the inmates, because I feel very strongly that it's the mission of my agency that we're not just representing victims, but we're trying to prevent victimization, and we're trying to be a part of that access of rehabilitation. And so I've met with a lot of these lifers, and I've had to have really tough conversations about stances that my office has had to take publicly against certain reforms that would benefit them. In that, I have always vocalized support for this process, for the Board of Pardons, because I do think it really offers a fair and balanced review for both the victims and the offenders. And so when I give my word to somebody, I tend to stand by that. And so when I believe that somebody has gone through all those processes of actually being rehabilitated by the system, and that our system has done what it's supposed to do, and I encourage someone to apply for this process, then I'm going to stand here and own that to the fullest.
Yeah, and I think if anyone would think that someone who now has that as their professional and maybe even life's calling to amplify and make victims' voices heard, you would use that in order to suppress directly or indirectly a victim's voice would be unfounded. So.
It's so antithetical to who I am, to who my office is, to the mission of our agency. I would never. It's absolutely 150%. I think you know from the degree of which I've communicated with your body that I want to make sure that victims' voices are elevated and heard in every single legal capacity and mechanism that they are afforded. And my office does so. My staff are phenomenal. They do so with great fidelity.
Ms. Storm, I am grateful for your input this morning.
I would like to make one final comment. In no way would I suggest or do I think that there would be any attempt to suppress the responses of the victims. I'm concerned that they may, seeing this situation, suppress such expressions themselves. That is my only concern. And Ms. Storm, I very much appreciate your explanation that you provided.
Thank you, sir.
Unintended suppression. Yes, I thought we covered that. Thank you, Ms. Storm.
Thank you. Have a great holiday, everyone.
The next case before the board is Kevin Butler. We'll have a 2-minute transition.